And so I'd like to introduce our amazing panelists today. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Emma Gertz. She's a digital learning specialist at School on Wheels in Los Angeles, California. And I have to say, Emma, what an amazing, amazing organization you're part of. Basically, School on Wheels is a nonprofit organization dedicated to tutoring children experiencing homelessness in California. And I'll come back to you in a moment, Emma, because your circumstance is one of the things that really struck me profoundly in doing some of the research I've done. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Sarah Sarr, who's in the English language program at Ahmed East in Tunisia, an English language specialist with the U.S. Department of State. I just want to comment, Ahmed East is an amazing organization. Basically, Ahmed East is a U.S. nonprofit organization that supports approximately 60,000 students across 20 different centers in the Middle East and North Africa, and it's all about strengthening mutual understanding and cooperation between Americans and the people of the Middle East and North Africa. And so thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. You're in Tunisia, that's right?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Two of my staff were on the previous panel.
Great. And I would also like to welcome, I think, Basil, are you still here with us?
I am here. Unfortunately, my camera is just not working with me tonight.
Well, I'll tell you, he's a good-looking guy, this Basil. But you can't see him. So Basil Rizvi is a business development manager and a lead trainer with Ahmed East, and he is based in a very hot country of Kuwait at the moment. So I just want to thank you all for joining so much.
Thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate it too. Thank you.
I just want to circle back actually to the thing about what you're working on, Emma. In doing some of the research for BigBlueButton. BigBlueButton is an open source program, and it came out of a Canadian university, and they were experiencing moderate growth. And then COVID came and the world blew up for them. But what's amazing about an open source project like BigBlueButton is that it's shaped by educators from around the world. And, what was interesting in the research, really eye-opening for me, was I had the opportunity to interview a head of technology for a school district in California. And this is somebody that is in technology for a district, so not just a teacher. And I asked, so what was that like? What were the big surprises for you when COVID hit? So the big surprise, so basically, and this is a district that is really very close to Silicon Valley. You're saying that the thing that struck them was the number of kids that didn't actually have access to technology. I mean, that floored me. And when in an earlier panel discussion, I asked the question of people that were watching, like, how many of you had that experience? And it was amazing. Whether they were from Germany or India, it was the same thing, that educators and institutions were surprised at how inconsistent the access to technology was. So I can imagine, as somebody that specializes in teaching children that are homeless, I mean, it must be a huge challenge for you. So if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind starting with you. If the focus of this discussion is what have we learned over the last 15 months, can you talk to us a little bit about that experience of, it's one thing to be homeless, it's another thing to be homeless and having to learn online. What was that experience, and what are some of the things that you've seen in the last 15 months?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That was like the biggest challenge for our students. I think other challenges that we saw related to distance learning for students experiencing homelessness was access to the internet. Luckily, we had a lot of school districts that were giving devices out to students, and also were able to give hotspots out to students. But a lot of times, hotspots might be inconsistent depending on the area that the student's in. And then we also saw some families that were very nervous about taking devices, loan devices from schools, because there was, often a contract they had to sign that they would have to, replace the device, pay for it if it was lost or broken. And we had families saying, I have 6 kids and we have toddlers and I just can't guarantee that this device isn't going to be broken and we can't afford to replace it. So that was a big barrier. And also just related to circumstances that our families are in. A lot of our parents are working very long hours, have a lot of other stressors having to do with housing and food security and all of those, more survival needs. And especially younger students really need a parent or adult around to support them while they're logged into their classes and trying to focus on distance learning. So those are all kind of the big challenges that we saw.
Amazing. So I'm curious, Sarah and Basil, you're coming from very different parts of the world. What was it like? Did you experience similar challenges in terms of kids not having or students not having access to technology? And if so, how did you handle it? Sarah, do you want to start?
Sure. Okay, so I think it's called to prayer in Kuwait because I can hear it outside my window as well. Okay, so I'd like to start by saying I was actually living and working in India 15 months ago when the pandemic came about and people went online. And I was working in international school there, and the transition was very swift. I think where we were, we saw it coming. The school that I was teaching at, we were starting to see what was happening in China. We were starting to see that the United States was dealing with things. Italy, very close to where we were. And so we started practicing before actually being in lockdown and closing down. So I would say the international school that I was working with at that time, we were very lucky because we were able to see it was coming and then, plan for it. And then we had our spring break and then nobody came back. Like after spring break, everything was locked down. So we sent everybody home with their technology, and it's a one laptop per child kind of school. And that was, so I would say in India, we were prepared because we saw it coming. Very affluent community in India, so there was not that surprise. I think the surprise here in Tunisia was not only the students who didn't have access, but also the staff. We have a pretty large staff in our office and quite a few of them don't have internet at home. And so we're asking them to work from home as well. And they don't even have the access and the resources. So it's interesting how this shift and how we are continuing to have this conversation, in my opinion, keeps us focusing on the haves and the have-nots. And we're not having the conversation about how to bring them all together in a way where we're not building more divide. So that is something that I've learned, in the last 15 months.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to this point because I think it is absolutely fundamental. We can't, because one of the things that's you are hearing more about is, we're never going back. Some way, shape, or form, technology is going to be here permanently. And it's like, okay, well, great. But if we've got districts with half the kids don't have access to the internet, what are we talking about here? It's already, as you say, the gap is already widening without this problem. How do we address it? But I'm curious because you're in a very different part of the world than Basil is. You're in Kuwait. What was it like there? Have we lost Basil?
Basil's in Kuwait. I'm in Tunisia.
Right. Yeah. So I was saying, sorry, I might have. I was saying that you're in a very different part of the world than Basil. I was asking Basil what it was like in Kuwait.
Oh, right.
I think we've lost Basil. Well, clearly the technology issues in Kuwait weren't as good as I thought they were. So I think we're going to have to come back to Basil and ask him a question separately. But I want to go stick with that point, because you're both you, Sarah and Emma, are experiencing firsthand those students that are at the greatest risk of being left behind. So what is having lived through it for 15 months, are you optimistic? I mean, first of all, I'll make an observation. I think what was surprising to me in listening to people was we've all been operating, or certainly I think a lot of people were operating under an assumption that technology was more widely accessible than it actually is. And I think what this has done is it's made teachers more aware of the circumstances of their students. Now, probably Sarah, where you're teaching, and Emma, certainly the nature of the work that you do, you're very, very cognizant of students that are in risky situations. So are you optimistic about going forward from this point? Do you think that things are going to be better, or are you really concerned about students being left behind?
Well, something that I've seen from some districts that we work with many districts throughout Southern California, is that as a result of the pandemic, they've adopted more one-to-one device policies, and also just in general, more focus on students, social, emotional health, less of a focus on rigid grading and testing. So I think that all of those are changes that I feel optimistic about. And yeah, like you said, I think the pandemic kind of upended our expectations in every area of our life, but definitely in education. So those are some changes I feel optimistic about for sure.
Yeah, and I will piggyback on that because I agree 100%. I feel like we have an opportunity to put less focus on standardized testing and more focus on the process, not the product. So as a language person, I'm always about the formative assessments. The summatives are fine, but I'm like, I want to see the process. I want to see how the student is getting, here's the assignment. Here's when it's due. How you get from one end to the other is completely up to you and your means and your, resource, because you can give, like, let's say a science fair, for example. You could have somebody in your classroom who has all the resource they need at home to create their science project. And yet you'll find some students who don't have the same kind of resource able to just be scrappy and find what they need to create an amazing product for that science fair. And it's not what they show up at the science fair, in my mind. It's the critical thinking and the processes they went through to create that final product. And I think this is an amazing time to really start making that shift. Let's start looking more at the soft skills, the negotiation skills, the, working with each other, the collaborative thinking. And I think that in this process of being thrown online and not being able to just, continue with the brain dump that, I can't remember who coined that phrase, but I loved it. And just really say, okay, kids, here you go. Meet me back in 2 or 3 hours and show me what you did. I think that's great. I think very promising.
It's interesting. One of the previous panel that we hosted was, and we were doing the research. If you just monitor the media, there's been so much negativity around the effect of this online learning. They're talking about it's been a disaster, kids have been left behind, they'll never catch up. And yet, as we were doing the research, we discovered that with children with special needs, there's been a lot of great examples of them benefiting for a whole variety of reasons. That in one of our last panelists is a researcher and has just written a book on what you can learn, what they have learned through this period about students with special needs and how they benefited. And some of the things they've said is that some of these groups have seen increases in attendance, that the kids with emotional needs are doing better, anxiety has been lowered, it gives them a voice that they didn't feel they had because they've been under stress in a classroom to perform. I'm just really interested. It's nice to hear both of you being optimistic about the role of technology, because if ever there could be people that were quite cynical about it, it could be people like yourselves. So it's quite interesting to hear that you're embracing the change, because I would think it'd be difficult as be an educator to embrace this change, because it's not an easy task teaching kids at different levels in a classroom on its own, and now you're trying to do it through a piece of technology. So it's quite interesting. So how long did you find it took you after COVID hit? How long did you find it took students to get into a regular rhythm and routine of learning again using these new devices?
Okay, I kind of want to go back to a point you just made here, as far as having to do with creating that space. Because what I find most valuable is online online learning, virtual learning, especially when it's synchronous like this. The students can't hide. Like in a classroom, the kids, they learn their tricks on how to just like float under the radar. And if I do this, the teacher doesn't catch me, the teacher doesn't see me. But in the virtual world, I have their list of names. I know when their camera is on or when their camera is off. And so it's an interesting thing that you can disappear in a classroom to some extent, especially, considering class sizes, where when you're in an online classroom, in my opinion, I find it's harder for students to hide, because especially when you're putting them into those breakout rooms and you're sending them that place with the tasks, and as the teacher, I can go into all my breakout rooms. I think it's kind of given an accountability, and I think some students find strength in that because there's still this virtual curtain, so to say, between you and the teacher and your classmates. So you've got this kind of security blanket that allows you to take more risks. And I think that is something that, now to answer your question, it took a long time for my students. So like for me, in the school that I was in India, our elementary school was 80% second language learner. And they were used to being able to hide and kind of skirt the edges and like do what they needed to do to get done. And the having to the language devices, the strategies that we use to teach language through content and CLIL and, translanguaging and things like that, we need to see their faces. Like we need to physically see their faces. And so when those cameras were off, as an educator, I was struggling because I can't see their face. I can't, because so much language, somewhere between 60 and 80%, depending on which research you believe, is nonverbal. And when you lose that as a language teacher, when you lose that nonverbal, full body language nonverbal, you take a great deal of time to reteach your students how to behave in an online environment. So it's like they've already learned classroom routines. Those all have to be scrapped, and we have to relearn routines to help create that two-way conversation again.
Now, Emma, I'm curious to get your comment on that, because one of the things that I came across in the research was this school district I referenced. It was very close to Silicon Valley. They said one of the things that was really important for our students was the need to turn their camera off, because so many of them were homeless. And I was like, what? That the fact that so in a way, Sarah, you're talking about, the need to be visible and to be able to see the student. And yet, Emma, my own experience from what I've seen is that the being invisible is necessary for some students. So what has been your experience with that?
Yeah, I think that it has been very important for a lot of our students to have their cameras off during classroom time. There's been a lot of discussion kind of, I think, in the educator community about how do we honor those students that are not in a living situation where they feel comfortable having their cameras on, but also holding them accountable to participation. And I think there's a lot of really creative things that have come up in response to that, you know, using the chat, using polling features, using other technology tools. And it, yeah, speaks to the just big challenge that educators have all over the place or have had this year. And I think that was one thing I wanted to say as a kind of silver lining or some positive thing that has come out of this year is it's kind of forced educators to find new and creative ways to do online learning, which of course existed before COVID and will exist afterwards, and as well as creative ways to use education technology. So not just, you know, replacing a worksheet with some online practice problems, but really using the tools in a really creative way to, like Sarah was saying, do those formative assessments and really encourage participation. And then the other thing I wanted to add, kind of to the point we were just talking about, is I feel that our students did the best that they could this year, but never really got into a rhythm or never really got to a place where they're, you know, learning as much as they would have in person. I think there continued to be barriers and continue to be barriers for students doing online learning, just in the consistency and the support they need to get logged on, which not all of them have, the connection with their teacher. I think those are, not to bring the mood down, but I think those are challenges that will continue to show effects.
Do you know, we've had some quite interesting speakers on, and you know, the first chap was a specialist in technology and education, says embrace it. The special needs experts were talking about how in a traditional classroom, teachers teach to the middle, whereas in a special needs classroom, you actually have to be more focused on the individual. And so what they've seen is, you know, that teaching style lends itself well to online learning. So I'm just curious, another dimension of this, which we haven't really talked about, is parents and the role of parents in this. And I'm curious, Emma, what's the experience like for you teaching kids that are homeless in the ability to get parents involved in supporting their kids in that environment?
Yeah, so kind of like I mentioned before, many of our parents are working very long hours, or if they're not, they're very busy, you know, meeting with housing navigators, meeting with employment development service providers. And so, you know, like any parent, have a lot of stressors that are that can get in the way of their ability to give as much attention to their students. You know, if their child is logging in to their Zoom class, or if they're finishing homework online, all of those things can often take a backseat to more, you know, survival needs, housing and food and employment and all of that, understandably. So yeah, I think that has been a major challenge for us. And kind of as a result of this year, it has been a renewed focus moving forward for engaging parents. We actually just hired a parent coordinator specialist who that will be their main role, is finding new ways for us to engage parents. So yeah, I think that's been a challenge. Another challenge is just the number of logins and websites and instructions and contact people that parents have had to manage newly in this new year. I think it's been a challenge for all parents, but especially ours that are dealing with all these stressors. So yeah, that's been a big challenge and a renewed focus as a result.
Interesting. And Sarah, from your perspective, what has your experience been in terms of liaising, working with parents?
It's definitely interesting now in Tunisia. So for us, the only people who were able to go online were 15 years and older. We have students as young as 5 at my school, because it's like an after-school supplemental English language program for people who want to learn English. Parents aren't interested in having their children, 5-year-old, go online, because to do that, the 5-year-old needs an email address. And so that's a big disconnect from like the school that I was at. The school would issue, all the students had an email address, so they were able to log into the Big Blue Button and the platforms and all that kind of stuff. Here at my school, we don't offer school email addresses. And so the rule is basically the firstborn child gets the father's email, the secondborn child gets the mother's email if she has one, and then the other ones just go without. And so it's more of a societal, and also like, do I want to say your 5-year-old has to have an email to participate in the online learning practice? You know, I think I am not a parent, so I really feel bad making any kind of like having an opinion about this. But I think if I was a parent and the school said you need to provide an email address for your 5-year-old, you're kind of like, really? I think so. So that's something that is the parents were very much not excited to get email addresses for their younger children. With that being said, our teenagers, when we gave them the option to go online, because we had to ask them and then get parental consent, it was a good balance between the student, 15 to 18 years old, who didn't want to go online, and the parent of a student who didn't want their student to go online. So it was interesting to me, the number of parents who said, no, I don't want my child participating in online learning. And also the students who were like, no, I don't want to participate in online learning. So I think you get, a potpourri of all sorts of opinions and perspectives, and it's finding that balance, finding that perfect, the sweet spot, right, for how we're gonna move forward. We're still not there yet. Like I think that, and especially here in Tunisia, like we don't have vaccines. We are in the middle of our 3rd wave, and it's pretty serious. Like we still have time, not to use the pandemic as an advantage. We still have time to sort that out, because we're not opening doors and going back to normal. So
now I'm curious, we are blessed to have people from all over the world participating in this and watching. We've had people from Cameroon and Colombia and India, Europe, Canada, US, etc. I'm curious, I'd love to see in the chat how many people are working in areas where kids could opt out of online learning. So Sarah, to that point, so what happened to these kids over the last 15 months if their parents wouldn't let them go online?
Well, we have had an ebb and flow of in class, out of class, in class, out of class. And basically our classrooms are small, 12 students in a class. And if we gave the cap at 3, if 3 students wouldn't attend, we canceled the class. We just stopped. Because again, we have that luxury. We're an auxiliary school. Like we're not, the kids don't have to be there 180 days. So we were able to cancel classes until the government lifted the restrictions and people were able to come back to school. And then make up the hours wherever we find a spot. So it's not a traditional approach in that regard. For our adult learners, they had no choice. They went online. Like so we have adult classes as well. And all of those students, they sign a piece of paper that says if COVID shuts us down, we're all going to the Big Blue Button. And it's not a big deal anymore. Like, for example, this morning, sad story, but it happens at least 2 or 3 times a week. Somebody in a class tested positive for COVID. So we immediately just get on the phone. We call each of the people in that class and we say, you guys are moving online as of tomorrow. And we just keep going. Class as usual. That's what happens for the adults. And for the kids, of 40 teenage classes, only 11 chose to go online, and they finished on time back in May. The rest of the students are just finishing up this week. So it's different.
I'm glad. Sarah, I don't make this offer lightly, but if you haven't had the pleasure of having children learning from home yourself, I agree. You can come over to my house and just finish out the year with them, just with my hands-on experience. And I will go to Tunisia.
I was going to say, you could send them to Tunisia. It's a beautiful country.
One or the other, you take them. I'm not even. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the bright spots, if there were any. What there has been a lot of focus on the not through you guys, but in the media. There's been a lot of focus on the negative aspects of what some students and parents have experienced. But as we heard in the earlier panel discussion, there have been bright spots. From your perspective, have there been positives, and if so, what are they? Emma?
I've just been overall impressed with our students' resilience and the fact that they are, logging into their Zooms and logging into tutoring with us, because we are an after school or outside of school tutoring program, has been really impressive. And just the drive and self-motivation that students have demonstrated to, keep up in school as much as possible and do their best has been a really bright spot. And kind of like we've been talking about before, just like the innovations and changes that I think we'll see in education moving forward when it comes to less of a focus on grading, less of a focus on testing, more creative uses for technology, and also just like more ways to learn. I think we've built out our online learning systems more and more, and our use of technology in the classroom more and more. So there's just going to be more options for different types of learners to learn in a way that's appropriate for them.
Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me, every day, I hope it's not, let's go back to business as usual. I really, when I hear that, I kind of, I can't wait to get back to normal. And you're kind of like, I'm from the States originally. And going back to normal, normal still was not good. And this is an opportunity where we can really, I love the title of the keynote. What was it, like innovation through the pandemic? What a great, title, innovation through the pandemic. And what is that phrase? Need is the mother of invention or something like that. I can't remember what it is. But
yeah.
There you go. But I also like to think that, everybody who started the pandemic at a certain place, they're all ending it in a certain place, and nobody's where they thought they were going to be. And so because of that, maybe it's an opportunity to say, sure, the kids here at Ahmed East didn't make the gains that we had hoped, but even though we have this big gap between the haves and the have-nots, and it's getting a little bit bigger, everybody struggled. I think there's comfort in this similar feeling, or this similar, like, we've lived through this together, and it can create camaraderie and understanding, and maybe some more compassion for those who don't have. And I think that's something that I keep going back to, is like, my niece's school 15 months ago, they started with, and I think this was on a different panel, delivering packs. They live in my brother lives in rural Michigan, and just dropping off packets of paper once a week and then picking up packets of paper once a week. Now they're actually online, and they've gone through that whole growth process of we're not ready. Let's just do regular distance learning, copy these words out of a notebook or whatever. But they've improved as this process has happened, and I take great comfort in that, because this was a school, that did not have a lot of resource, and yet they figured it out. And that's one of the reasons why I love being in education. I love being an educator. Some of the smartest people, they'll figure it out, and they'll make sure that they're reaching as many kids as possible. And I find that to be incredibly, promising, regardless of where you are on the planet.
So you're an optimist, Sarah.
Yes.
And you also, if I understand right, you're an optimist as well.
Absolutely.
Do you know what? Okay, I don't mean to be a doofus here, but I was expecting more negativity, not from you guys, but just across the board. I live in this area. I live in a wealthy city, Ottawa, Canada. It's a G7 capital, and I've just heard a lot of negative from teachers. And yet, what I've consistently heard today is, I think as a general comment, I've heard a lot of optimism about the future, and I've heard a lot of comments about we can't go back to the old way of doing things. We have to embrace this change. And it suggests, in a way, that people recognize that there was something not working in the system as it was. So if I've got that right, what is the opportunity, do you think, for online learning? If you can restate it, because you have kind of commented on it, but I'm really interested. You've talked about new ways of doing things. What is the great opportunity then, by embracing technology and being willing to change your approach to teaching?
For me, and I'll make it very brief. I think we need to give more power to the teachers. Trust that they are doing the right thing. At the end of the day, the teachers know their students better. And I say this as an administrator. The teachers know the students better than the administration does. They know the students better than the politicians do in the departments of educations and the ministries of educations. I mean, I feel like there has to be that trust to just, tell the teacher, by the end of the year, I expect you to be here. And I think we have enough high quality teachers that they'll figure it out, and they might guilt those less quality teachers into doing the right thing. Like, I think that's kind of where I am. I'm like, I want to give more responsibility to the teachers without and don't forget this standardized test is, and you got to do the benchmark. Like, I think they're ready. But this is my point. The teachers have proven that they can do just about anything. Let them do it without all the restriction and regulation and standardization of the curriculum.
Wow, Sarah. Somebody said, Sarah, my union will love you for saying that. Wow. And I can tell you, at listening to about 20 British teachers going on and on and on about the incessant testing and how much parents hated it and teachers hated it, I have to say, I'm with you, sister. Emma, what's your take?
Yeah, I think along the same lines. I think that the opportunity that online learning has given us in education is providing more opportunities for students to have more personalized learning opportunities for students. More ways for students to learn in the way that's best for them, because every student learns differently, whether that's choosing the tool that they're using, opening up more technology tools for students to demonstrate their learning and use for learning, or whether it's schedules. I think that online learning allows for more flexibility in students' schedules and when they're learning. So I think just more individuality, and it goes along with what Sarah was saying about trusting teachers to know what the best tool or schedule or method is going to be for their students. I think we just have more options now in that regard.
Listen, we're going to wrap. We're going to stop there. I just want to say to everybody who's been participating and listening to the various panels, the panels have been recorded. They'll be available for you after the fact. And I just want to say a massive thank you to Emma and Sarah first of all, incredible tenacity, great work, such positivity. As a parent, I just want to say thank you so much for your dedication. Very much appreciated, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.